After months of Trump claiming there'll be a coronavirus vaccine widely available by the end of the year, despite just about every infectious disease expert cautioning otherwise, he took things to a new level today. Here's how the president responded when a reporter asked him if there might be a vaccine by Election Day, less than 3 months away.
I'm optimistic that it'll be probably around that date. I believe we'll have the vaccine before the end of the year, certainly, but around that date, yes, I think so.
He also said that kind of timing, quote, wouldn't hurt his chances against Joe Biden, but was quick to add he's not doing it for the election. For that, he apparently has other plans, like sowing seeds of doubt in the integrity of the election and the security of mail-in voting, as he's repeated time and time again.
There is no way you can go through a mail-in vote without massive cheating. Mail-in ballots will lead to the greatest fraud. You guys like to talk about Russia and China and other places? They'll be able to forge ballots. They'll forge them. They'll do whatever they have to do.
This is just the latest in Donald Trump's efforts to delegitimize the upcoming election. And remember the Ukraine scandal? It feels like a long time ago. But it was only 8 months ago that the president was impeached by the House of Representatives, accused of withholding military aid and other political benefits to pressure the president of Ukraine to announce investigations into 2016 election interference and his opponent in the 2020 race, Joe Biden, along with his son, Hunter. Of course, 2 months later, a majority of the Senate voted not to convict Trump or remove him from office, despite strong objections from Democrats and one prominent Republican.
The grave question the Constitution tasks senators to answer is whether the president committed an act so extreme and egregious that it rises to the level of a high crime and misdemeanor. Yes, he did.
And as you may also remember, that whole investigation came shortly after yet another election interference scandal, which helped special counsel Robert Mueller fill 448 pages about Russian election interference that benefited the Trump campaign, plus potential obstruction of justice by Trump himself. But in the end, Mueller opted not to make a determination about whether Trump broke the law.
Under long-standing department policy, a president cannot be charged with a federal crime while he is in office. That is unconstitutional. If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so.
If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. Meaning? New York Times bestselling author Jeffrey Toobin answers that question as he digs deep into the true crimes and misdemeanors, the investigation of Donald Trump, with more than 100 interviews with witnesses, prosecutors, members of Trump's legal team, and others to lay out where and when he thinks the president did commit crimes and how the special counsel let him get away with it. I think I got about 90 minutes of sleep last night because I couldn't put it down. And my only criticism of the book, it should really come with a defibrillator because, trust me, you're going to need it. Jeffrey Toobin is also a CNN legal analyst, staff writer for The New Yorker, as well as a former assistant DA from Brooklyn, associate counsel in the Department of Justice during the Iran-Contra scandal. Jeffrey, thanks so much for doing this, and congratulations on the book.
Well, thank you, Jim. And I apologize for disrupting your sleep.
That's fine. That's my own choice. Let me read those words again. If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. And by the way, the language in the document itself, as people know, is even more obtuse. I get it that department policy says you can't charge a sitting president with a crime, but department policy does not say that you can't say if a sitting president did commit a crime. Why did he embrace all this legal gobbledygook rather than just saying it outright, Jeffrey?
Well, this is one of the core issues and one of the core criticisms I have of Mueller and his team, who were and are very honorable people who did in many respects a superb investigation, assembling facts that most people didn't know about the extent of Russian influence in the 2016 election, and in particular about the president's really egregious, obvious, and criminal obstruction of justice. So why didn't he just say that? And I think a lot of it goes back to Mueller's personality and character, which, as I say, is very honorable in many respects. But he is a institutionalist. He is someone who has been part of the Marine Corps, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and is someone who believes deeply, and I think to a fault, in the chain of command. And he convinced himself that the Justice Department policy, which does prohibit indictment of a president, also prohibits saying whether a crime was committed because, as he explained it, he would not have his day in court if I simply said he was guilty of a crime. And I thought that was a great overreading of the Department of Justice policy and indicative of a caution and a rule-following nature that, as with so many people, his greatest strength also turned out to be his greatest weakness.
If he had said that I cannot charge him with a crime, but he did commit a number of crimes of obstruction of justice, would that have changed anything going forward, Jeffrey?
Well, I do think so, actually, because after the Mueller report came out, largely because of the evidence established in the obstruction of justice portion of his report, when he talked about, the demand to James Comey, then the FBI director, to cut short the investigation of Michael Flynn, the National Security Advisor, when he used his White House counsel, Don McGahn, to try to fire Mueller and then instruct McGahn to lie about that overture. If Mueller had said simply that those were crimes, as he should have, and as they were, I do think impeachment would have started earlier in the House of Representatives. The ambiguity and the confusion which Mueller expressed himself led Nancy Pelosi, who was really in charge of this process, to basically say, we're not going there. And I do think there's a very good chance Mueller would have been impeached, as he was later for the Ukraine matter. Would Trump have been removed from office? I don't think so. I don't think there is any set of facts, given the contemporary Republican Party, which is more like a cult at this point than a political party. I don't think there ever would have been 67 votes to remove Trump, but I think it would have been the right thing to do, and that alone would have justified Mueller just saying what happened.
Okay, let's continue the why didn't he litany. Why didn't he subpoena the President of the United States? I wasn't much of a lawyer, but I was a decent enough lawyer to know that having the primary person in your investigation speaking to him, asking him questions directly, might have advanced the case. Why didn't he subpoena him after this deal for him to testify at Camp David fell through?
Especially after the president was talking about this scandal the whole time. It's one thing if your subject is just remaining silent, but the fact is Trump was talking about Russia and talking about his interactions with members of his with Comey, for example, and lying about it extravagantly. So why didn't he do it? Well, I think it was a combination of things. I think there was some clever lawyering on the part of the defense. John Dowd, Jay Sekulow, and even Rudy Giuliani, for all the craziness he displayed. They kicked the can down the road. They succeeded in telling Trump, in telling Mueller, look, we're not saying no, but we're not saying yes. And by extending the controversy, Mueller was left to decide, should I extend my investigation into 2019 and even 2020 because of a legal fight over the subpoena, or should I accept the really sort of pitiful offer of written questions and written answers that were largely written by Trump's lawyers? That there was some clever lawyering there on the part of the defense. But again, I think it was also Mueller's unwillingness to take a direct confrontation with the President of the United States, which I think was too bad.
You know, you mentioned the Giuliani thing. I totally agree with what you said in your book, and I'm paraphrasing, that his work converted Mueller from a revered public servant to a political actor. And after that praise, I guess that's praise for him, you atoned for that sin. I think you said something like the worst lawyering in the history of the world when describing Giuliani's work around Ukraine. Am I right about that?
I would say that's an accurate paraphrase.
Okay,
no, I mean, Giuliani did an effective job in the Mueller investigation by, forestalling the subpoena and by creating a political controversy that rallied Republicans against Mueller and for Trump, which was not the case when Mueller was first appointed. But then when you turn to the Ukraine story, where Giuliani got involved in this crazy investigation led by these two marginal figures from Florida, Zev and Igor, trying to implicate Joe Biden in some sort of wrongdoing in Ukraine and using the power of the presidency to essentially extort that information out of the new president of Ukraine. Single-handedly, Rudy Giuliani got his client impeached. I think he's the only lawyer in American history who could have such a dubious accomplishment. But those are the two sides of Giuliani in this story.
But by the way, I asked you before if it turned out that Mueller had used different language, if it would have changed anything. If Trump had testified, I've seen depositions of Trump in civil matters where he literally changes his story every other sentence. Had Trump testified, history would have been changed, no?
Again, I am a sufficient believer in the cultishness of the Republican Party that there is almost nothing Trump could have done short of, as he once put it, shooting someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue that would have gotten 67 votes against him in the Senate. But I do think there probably would have been a more compelling case, though I thought the Ukraine case was very compelling, against him in the Congress if he had testified. And it just, as I say, it would have been the right thing to do, and it was the appropriate way for this investigation to proceed.
And, of course, he didn't go after the financial records, which caused us to never know what was the genesis of the bromance, or whatever you want to call it, with Vladimir Putin. You know, Jeffrey, I heard your explanation of, Mueller's an old-school guy. He plays by the rules, all this sort of thing. But he's also a smart guy. And how did he not know that a sort of a by-the-rules prosecutor was playing in a hyper-partisan world where that sort of thing just doesn't work? I just don't quite get it.
Well, one of the things I say in the book is that one way of looking at this struggle was between good and evil. And there's a lot to commend that view. But another way of looking at it is between old and new. Is that, Robert Mueller is not just old, but he's old school. And he is someone who believes that prosecutors should say what they have to say in courtrooms and otherwise shut up. And they should not respond to criticism that they receive. And they should not, be part of the political process. And again, there is something admirable about that austere approach. But when confronted with someone who was using the tactics of the modern world and in such an extreme and really distasteful way as Trump and his allies were, I do think it called for a somewhat different kind of response than Mueller offered, but he is who he is.
And I know he doesn't like the limelight, so if he saw a good friend of mine, who shall remain unnamed, walking down the street wearing this, he wouldn't like that. Is that correct?
No, and there is a sort of perversity to Mueller too that I think every time MSNBC treated him as the great Democratic savior, and every time that people saw these Mueller time T-shirts or the Robert Mueller action figures, he was determined even more to play it straight down the middle and not be a political person. Again, admirable, but also perhaps not right for the moment.
So can we spend the last couple of minutes you playing Nostradamus, if you don't mind? Imagine a second term of a Donald Trump, impeached but not convicted, criminally investigated but not charged. Can he be any more, I'm serious, disrespectful of laws and the Constitution that he's been in the first 3.5 years?
Oh, absolutely. I think a second term will make this term look like something out of the framers of the Constitution.
Give me an example.
Unhinged and unencumbered by any sort of worry about the judgment of the voters. I mean, remember, the narcissism that is the touchstone of Donald Trump's character carries over to policy. I mean, that's what the whole Ukraine story was all about, is that, the American relationship with Ukraine is complicated. We have issues relating to Russia. We have issues relating to the European Union. And Trump didn't care about any of that. All he cared about was the relationship with Ukraine, how it could help him. And I think, given the sanction of a second term, that sort of attitude won't just be characterized by his relationship with Ukraine, but also every other country in our foreign policy, and as well as private companies in the United States. So, I think an unleashed Donald Trump will be even more aggressive and, frankly, even more outlaw than the one we'd seen before.
Now people know why I mentioned the defibrillator. Congratulations on a great piece of work, Jeffrey Toobin, and thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. The book, again, is True Crimes and Misdemeanors, the investigation of Donald Trump.